The February update for New World is upon us and it's coming this Monday, but the question is it big enough? Does it do enough to really bring any players back, or will it stop players leaving who haven't already? Now this month was all about bugs, bans and bots, so I think with that in mind, I don't really think that this patch was really all about getting new players back. I sort of feel like it was to stop players leaving and to just make the game feel a bit better for everybody who's currently playing. Now for the February update, I'm not going to sit here and just read the patch notes. I pretty much covered this patch in piecemeal as we got updates on the PTR, so you can check those out if you want to really keep up to date. And quite frankly, I just don't want to repeat myself. But there is actually one sneaky addition into the latest patch notes that I've seen, which is basically when you are on the warboard, you're going to be able to see players who have signed up's average gear score and the weapon mastery for the two weapons that I think they are wielding. Now I don't know if it's when they're signed up or when it's just like always ongoing, who knows, but that's going to make planning the wars and invasions a lot easier for like companies and stuff like that. Small little addition, but a nice change. Okay, on to the bigger question. Does the February update do enough really to get players back or retain players? And I think really we have to consider pressure points that the players have been feeling and ask the question, are these somewhat resolved? And the first one we're going to talk about is Umbral Shards and the end game. So I said when they announced the January update patch that effectively that killed the end game to a lot of players, because quite frankly it made only one type of content be the only way of progressing, that being the expedition mutators, and that really caused massive problems for the end game. Well, does this patch address some of those issues? Yes, it does, and in two main ways. Yes, we're going to get more shards from OPR, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but for me the key one is actually getting way more shards from the gypsum casts. Now this is basically going from a range of 3 to 200 to a range of 100 to 400, and that's really huge. It pretty much means that most of the end game activities are actually worth doing again. Now how true that remains in the long term, we'll have to wait and see, when you consider that like getting a bronze on an M10 is like 4,000 shards, and I think if you got like as much gypsum cast as you possibly could in a day, you'd probably get a similar number. You might be thinking, oh, that's sort of fair. Well, it would take way longer and probably be way more difficult to actually get all of your gypsum casts in a day. But the key thing that this does for me is any player who is like freshly gear score 590 plus will now have a very easy way of progressing up to maybe like 610 or even something like 615 gear score, and it makes getting from like 615 to 625 a little bit easier, but that's still going to be a grind, I think. But what it does is it keeps casual players or people who are late to the game within touching distance, and I think that's very important. So I think that's a really good change. I also do like the change to outpost rush, but for me it sort of doesn't feel like it goes far enough. You're going to get 54 loss and 104 win. Now that is obviously if you get the 500 points in game that you need. That's going to be a little bit easier now because damage done will be actually counted, which is nice. But for me those numbers are a little bit on the low side, because I still don't feel like that you can actually properly progress just doing PvP, and I would like that to be an option for players who just want to progress via PvP. They are updating the rewards that you get from the outpost rush chest to be mostly like PvP focused, and I do think that that is a good change. And if those items are actually quite good, then in theory you can make a better argument that you can just progress doing PvP. However, my instinct is that these numbers are slightly undertuned when you compare them to the gypsum cast, but still a nice change overall. Hopefully I think with this that Amazon have learned their lesson. It's okay to add new kind of content and features and stuff like that, but what you can't do is do it at the expense of the rest of your content. Making one content type be essentially the only way to progress is underwhelming and pushes players out of the game. But now with these changes, I feel like if you were pushed out from the Mutator patch, do consider coming back, because you will be able to reasonably progress without doing them. So come back, dip your toes in the water again and see how you feel. Now let's talk about combat. Now for me when it comes to combat, there's two main issues. One of them is desync, and the other is that hit registering in melee is pretty bad. Now I must confess that this patch doesn't really seemingly address either of those issues. They have spoken about desync and said that they are working on it, but the hit register, I haven't personally seen anything about that. Maybe they've posted it, maybe it's helped in this patch, but yeah, I've not seen too much about that. What they are changing is just the general feel of combat and making it feel more smooth, responsive, and actually more reactive. So I won't go into all of the changes, but effectively as you start an attack, until you actually start doing the damage of that attack, you'll be able to react by either blocking or dodging. That combined with actually having the weapon swap when you press the button is going to make the whole thing feel a lot smoother. There's some extra changes there, but overall I think these combat changes when I did them in Outpost Rush did feel pretty nice and better better. I did have a little bit of a bug when you like did the dodge from an attack, but hopefully they fix that when it comes to the live version. So these combat changes aren't the issues that I necessarily had a major problem with, but they do feel nice overall. I don't think this is going to get people back unless they really hate the combat. If you did dislike the combat, come back, it might be worth trying. And the next thing I just want to talk about is the overall player friction that they mentioned. So in the February developer talk, they spoke about how they wanted to reduce the friction between basically themselves and the players, and one of the key things that they are doing is changing the Azoth travel cost. That is getting a flat out nerf. Pretty much everything is either going to be 20 Azoth or less. It doesn't matter how far you're going, it doesn't matter how full you are. Now a lot of you probably underestimate how important this is, and to me it's not that big of an issue, but I got a lot of comments talking about how frustrated they were by having to pay this Azoth cost. Now whilst the developers, they say, oh well, we know that this diminishes the actual need for Azoth and we're going to make some changes there, in the short term this is a good change for a lot of players and I am happy to see it. But quite frankly, on a personal note, I would have loved to have actually had like mounts in the game and had teleporting be a high cost, because then you could like make a case for it and it would make sense. It's a bit late for that. Overall, this is a good change though. The next little pressure point is the Expedition Mutator Orbs. You were able to buy one once every 7 days. They are now making that once every 3 days. You know, and personally I think they could change that to daily and it would still be fine. I'd just like to see the barriers to entry literally removed. And I also do worry a little bit that in a game design sense, that if you make the Expedition Mutators so easy to get into, that they again become the de facto content because they are way more rewarding at the higher levels than the gypsum casts and stuff like that. But my instinct says that that's not really a major concern. Now, one thing I've spoken about recently is catch-up mechanics, and to be fair, they are doing some positive changes in regards to that in this patch. Now, I'm not sure that these are intentional catch-up mechanics or they just think that this is how the game should have been from the first place. Either way, these are some positive changes. There's more ways to get gypsum. You can buy one from the vendor, you can get them from quests in Shattered Mountain and Reekwater. The amount of expertise that you get from the Outpost rush chests are going up. Quest XP is boosted by 50%. Fishing is a little bit easier. Crafting is easier. Lots of little changes that I think just make the game a lot more approachable for casuals and players starting anew. I am personally thinking about leveling an alt from like level 1 to gear score 600 and just sort of seeing how long it takes me playing relatively casually. I would say that I might stream that on Twitch, but I sort of think like it might be too boring for Twitch. Come over and follow me on there anyway. I promise it'll be entertaining. I promise. But yeah, lots of little changes that I think sort of help the game there with little catch-up mechanics, whether or not it was intentional or not. Another big pressure point that I've been speaking about literally since October when I made a video where I think I called it something like taxes not fun, and that is the housing tax. They are completely nerfing the amounts that a company can essentially charge. You will now only be able to set this to 0.1% or 1%. And this is good news for players. We don't like paying housing tax. The developers are finally realizing that tax is not fun. I mean, who'd have thought that? Better late than never to do this change. Now, there are also lots of weapon balance changes. I never properly speak about these because quite frankly, I don't understand the implications of this until we see the meta in Outpost Rush and people try and abuse the system by picking the most OP weapon and that kind of thing. And quite frankly, I don't think I'm a good enough player to really discern what's the best item from just reading a patch note. I'm sure some people will be happy and I'm very sure some people will be angry. To answer the overall question, I don't think that this month is like a PR month. I don't think that the developers are like, okay, let's send out a marketing team and tell people that this is the patch that they should return. It's not that kind of patch. This is just getting their ducks in a row and making the game feel better for current players. Sure, some players might see some of the changes and be like, right, that Azoth travel was really annoying me. I'll happily go and try the game now. But I sort of suspect that that will be a minority of players. As for whether or not it's big enough, well, they were only ever trying to do bugs. They said that they fixed like 1,000 bugs. If the patch comes out and it all works smoothly and it just feels nice and the bugs are actually reduced, thumbs up, people will be thrilled. If they start introducing more bugs, we might have a bit of a problem. As I said in that Feb update, they did speak about how they want to continuously reduce friction, so they'll be making further changes. That's exciting. I'm also excited to see what we'll get in the March update with regards to the blunderbuss and Isabella's Alert, the new expedition. If the question is, will this patch be big enough to bring players back? Well, the answer is probably not. But it just might stop more players from leaving, and that's just as important as well. Come and follow me on Twitch, like this video, subscribe to the channel. Have a most beautiful day. Goodbye.